Hello, I'm Luca Coasters, and today I'll be starting my series in which I review my top 20 coasters that I've ridden. Today I'll actually be starting off with an honourable mention which didn't quite make the cut, but as I love it so much I figured I'd review it, and that is Goliath at Walibi Holland. Goliath is a 154 foot tall Intamin Mega Coaster which opened in 2002 at what was at the time known as Six Flags Holland. Goliath was originally planned to be themed Superman, but in 2000 what is now known as Express was re-themed at the last minute from the Riddler to Superman, as it was a less obscure character, so they'd settled on the Goliath theme for their Intamin Mega. Goliath creates an intimidating first impression as it towers over you as you drive into the park, with the layout sprawling out by a lake. Despite it being one of the first rides you see when approaching the park, it's actually situated at the back of the park and you actually have to go down a pretty long path to get to it, which can be tedious if you're trying to hop from, say, Untamed to Goliath. Despite this, the ride itself is presented well. There is a large sign at the front of the ride, and the entrance plaza is really centered around the huge blue and black steel structure. The queue line itself lacks theming, but luckily it moves fast due to the high capacity and good operations. Despite me going on a fairly busy day, the line didn't really exceed 10 minutes, even though it was fairly long. The station itself was also unthemed, but you're able to choose a row, which is a bonus. However, most of what I'm saying about the theme is fairly redundant, as next year it's being overhauled along with the rest of Speed Zone, and based off Walibi's most recent work, I'm sure this overhaul will be amazing and it will be really well themed after. When you board the ride, you sit in the comfortable Intamin trains, which have the famous T-bars. These restraints are held by enthusiasts as being some of the most comfortable and the best restraints. I'd say they're slightly overrated as I find it hard to get room in them, but you can still enjoy the ride with them and they're really comfortable still. One thing to note is the length of these trains, as they have 8 cars with 16 rows, and this is really long for a coaster of the size, which means that the ride can greatly differ from whether you sit in the front or whether you sit in the back. And I only rode towards the back, so I can't say too much about how this coaster is in the front. So when you dispatch, you go up a swift cable lift hill, which is one of the first cable lift hills on an Intamin coaster, with only Expedition G-Force and Millennium Force having one prior. The cable is used as it's lighter than a standard chain, which allows for steeper and faster lift hills, which also require less maintenance. The ascent itself is fairly slow compared to other cable lifts. Before you know it, you're already cresting the lift hill. Then, you hit the drop. You're flung down 151 feet at 70 degrees, and all you can feel is strong ejector as the train yanks you towards the ground. What makes this drop so great is the cable lift, which has a fairly sharp crest compared to the other cable lifts. I'd actually compare this drop most to that on a second gen B&M Hyper, but this has even stronger airtime than that, I'd say. Then the train begins to flatten out as it enters the first valley. The valley has decent positives but nothing outstanding, and I doubt it exceeds say 4 Gs, but the next airtime hill is phenomenal. So the reason I love this airtime hill is because it's so tall and it has a really sharp crest, which is very different to most Intamin airtime hills from that era. This provides a very different sensation as you don't get airtime until cresting over the very top, but when you crest you violently get thrown out of your seat, which is very different to say the hills on El Toro, which slowly build up to the strong ejector. If you compare it to anything, then I actually compare it most to the rolling Thunder Hill on El Toro, as it also provides a sudden pop of ejector later into the hill, but the one on Goliath isn't nearly as strong, however it is more sustained. At this point, many are blown away by the beginning of the coaster and expect the rest to be just as stunning, but this is a point where the coaster really dies down. The next valley is nothing special as it's so drawn out because of a small right hand turn in the middle of it, but then you rise up into the world's first element, the Stangle Dive, one which has been imitated on many of the world's best coasters. However, the one on this gently banks 121 degrees before diving back down. While this coaster provides a unique mixture of floater and hang time, it isn't nearly as wild or as snappy as some may expect. But one fun thing you can do on this is lean to the right even further when you're on the right side, and then you kind of invert, which makes the element slightly more fun. The exit to this element is even more drawn out though, as you make a shallow descent while banking to the left, and then comes the most infamous part of the coaster, the drawn out helixes. While they pale in comparison to other more intense Intamins, they actually surprisingly still deliver decent positives, as they're so sustained, but it's still not anything striking. And as you're so low to the ground, you get a great sensation of speed while you whiz by the grass and water. Honestly, this element is quite lackluster, and then you climb up into the drawn out twisted hill, which provides little laterals, and if you really pay attention you might notice a brief and weak moment of floater, but then again this element really doesn't deliver. It feels like the train is slowly rolling from right to left. Then comes another helix, and it's the same story. A drawn out turn which feels like it was designed so you can get a good view of the docks in the lake you're over. The next twisted hill is the same as the first, and at this point many would be underwhelmed by the coaster, with it starting off with two fantastic elements and it completely dying out. Then the ride enters a drawn out straight section, where the coaster just banks from one side to the other, but it doesn't really provide any force. But just when this coaster feels like it's running out of steam, it climbs up the first of the final three bunny hills. This is very similar to the first hill, as you get a sudden but surprising moment of sustained ejector because of the sharp crest, and then you traverse through three more, each providing fairly strong ejector. I actually prefer these hills to the bunny hills on G-Force, as on Goliath you really get to save the airtime. As you crest the final bunny hills, you don't really have much speed, but you can really feel the train being dragged down, which is what delivers the ejector. The valleys in between them aren't too intense, but they don't really harm the pacing, because before you know it, you're cresting the next hill. The coaster then makes a short left-hand turn, then it suddenly banks to the right, providing a good moment of laterals, which compares to the low to the ground turns on some Schwarzkopf coasters. The next right-hand turn into the brakes provides some really strong positives, and it really whips you around it, and then you glide into the brakes, really ending the coaster on a high note. So every time I rode this coaster I was blown away. I went in with low expectations because of some mixed reviews I've heard of the coaster, but those expectations were absolutely blown out of the water. I was so surprised by the airtime on this ride, just how strong it was as well. Honestly, I think this ride is so underrated, and I'd say it's one of the best coasters in Europe. So I'd say overall this is a fantastic coaster which has some phenomenal moments. Unfortunately it suffers from weak pacing, as do many coasters from this older era of Intamin. However, Goliath has particularly weak pacing in the middle section, which prevents this coaster from being world class, but I can still appreciate the amazing elements it has. The airtime hills provide a unique sensation due to their drastically different shaping, which is a part of the reason I love this coaster so much. Taking into account all the negatives and the positives of this coaster, I'd give it an overall score of 90 out of 100. I highly recommend going to Walibi Holland when you're in the area, as this combined with Untamed makes an amazing top 2, and it's always great to add another Intamin Mega Coaster to your list. Anyways, comment down below your thoughts on Goliath at Walibi Holland, and why not like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll upload some new videos soon.